This is the Dollemore Daily, and I'm Jesse Dollemore. Voting rights are some of our most sacred rights in this country. The right to vote is a protection against tyranny. It is a protection against the status quo. This election season, we are witnessing an assault on our fundamental right to vote. In Wisconsin yesterday, they held a primary. And before the primary, there was a lot of legal wrangling because of coronavirus to try to delay the date requirement to receive absentee ballots. Because of coronavirus, there has been a massive surge in requests for absentee ballots. 1.2 million people requested ballots for this primary election, not general election, primary election, when normally the state receives 200 to 250,000 requests for absentee ballots. 1.2 million, almost a million more. And there was, legal challenges and wranglings. A federal judge ordered, I want to get his name right here. Federal Court Judge William Conley ordered the deadline for receiving ballots to be extended to 4 p.m. on April 13th rather than April 7th, which was yesterday. 6 days in order that all of the surge, because a lot of people didn't even get their ballot that they requested, because the state's infrastructure, the number of people they employ, they couldn't handle how many people requested absentee ballots, which was a measure to keep themselves safe, so they wouldn't have to go out and physically vote. To make matters worse, because of fears of coronavirus, a lot of poll workers who are volunteers refuse to show up. Look, I'm not going to do it this year because I don't want to put my life in danger. Because of that, their governor, Tony Evers, who's a Democrat, called up the National Guard, the Wisconsin National Guard, to help run the elections, which wasn't even adequate anyway. Because of the lack of personnel to run the elections, in Milwaukee, we'll just use Milwaukee as an example, 8 polling places are open, when normally they would have 180 polling places in the city of Milwaukee. Oh, I'm sorry, I was wrong. 5 polling places were open. 5. Which results in this: chaos. In the midst of a public health crisis, you have far more people cramming into far fewer polling places, which means longer lines, which means violations of the recommendations of not only the President of the United States, but also the governor and the Centers for Disease Control, their recommendations to maintain social distancing, physical distancing. So you end up with situations like this. People crowded together in a situation where we are transferring the virus. One person can transfer it to 2 or 3 people. Those 2 or 3 people can transfer it to 2 or 3 people each. It is exponential in transference. And the Supreme Court ruled in a case that is it literally is Republican National Committee versus Democratic National Committee, because the Democrats want more voting, more participation. And the Republicans want to squelch that. They don't want people voting. Fewer votes means more Republicans stay in office. Statistically, when voter turnout is high, Democrats benefit from that. When the democratic process works, the Democratic Party benefits. But when Republicans are able to stifle and squelch the vote, they benefit. And so the Supreme Court, in a 5-4 ruling, ultimately disenfranchised tens of thousands of people from Wisconsin. I'm going to read a little bit from Justice Ginsburg, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, dissent in answer to the unsigned ruling of the 5-4 majority. Listen, again, this is why voting does matter. This is why elections matter. This is why you need to do everything you can to ensure that Donald Trump doesn't get reelected president. Because if this is the kind of chicanery that is going on, the kind of bullshit that is getting passed through with the 5-4 majority, imagine what it's going to be like with the 7-2 Republican majority, with cases that are, again, literally Republican National Committee versus Democratic National Committee. What do you think the Republican majority on the Supreme Court will do? Reading from Ruth Bader Ginsburg's dissent, the court's order requires absentee voters to postmark their ballots by Election Day, April 7th, i.e. tomorrow, even if they did not receive their ballots by that date. That is a novel requirement. Recall that absentee ballots were originally due back to the election officials on April 7th, which the district court extended to April 13th. Neither of those deadlines carried a postmark by requirement. While I do not doubt the good faith of my colleagues, I think she's being generous there. While I do not doubt the good faith of my colleagues, the court's order, I fear, will result in massive disenfranchisement. A voter cannot deliver for postmarking a ballot she has not yet received. Yet tens of thousands of voters who timely requested ballots are unlikely to receive them by April 7th. The court's postmark deadline, rising concerns about COVID-19 pandemic have caused a late surge in absentee ballot requests. It is out of the scope of anyone's control what is happening. And in order for a proper working of our democratic process, of our democracy, we have to make exceptions. For the safety and well-being of the electorate, we must make exceptions. She continues, the court notes that the district court's order allowed absentee voters to cast ballots after Election Day. If a voter already in line by the poll's closing time can still vote, why should Wisconsin's absentee voters already in line to receive ballots be denied the franchise? Question is not answered because it is an unsigned ruling by the Supreme Court. She continues, because gathering at the polling place now poses dire health risks. An unprecedented number of Wisconsin voters, at the encouragement of public officials, have turned to voting absentee. About 1 million more voters have requested absentee ballots in this election than in 2016. Accommodating the surge of absentee ballots requests has heavily burdened election officials, resulting in a severe backlog of ballots requested but not promptly mailed to voters. It is not the fault of the voter. It is not even necessarily the fault of the state. No one could have predicted the effect, the impact that the coronavirus has had all across our society. From supply chains and grocery stores to schools, the economy, and our very democracy. She finishes with this. The majority of this court declares that this case presents a narrow technical question. That is wrong. The question here is whether tens of thousands of Wisconsin citizens can vote safely in the midst of a pandemic. Under the district court's order, they would be able to do so. Even if they receive their absentee ballots in the days immediately following Election Day, they could return it with the majority stay in place. That will not be possible. Either they will have to brave the polls, endangering their own and others' safety, or they will lose their right to vote through no fault of their own. We shouldn't have to be put in a position to choose death, possible death, or exercising our constitutionally protected right to vote. And that is what Republicans are asking people to do. It is the same kind of bargain that they want when Glenn Beck says, I would risk my life to get the economy going again. We shouldn't have to make those kind of decisions, those kind of bargains. We shouldn't negotiate between what is a fundamental, constitutionally guaranteed and protected right to vote, or possibly contracting a deadly virus from which 12, 13, 15,000 people have already died from in the United States alone. We're going on 500,000 infections in the United States. Last I looked, it was like 375,000 Americans. And the Republican Party is now trying to squelch people's right to vote, to disenfranchise them, in order that they stay in power. This is a lesson among many, a lesson that many that we have learned and many that we will. Because as long as Republicans gain power and control any level of power in this country, this is the kind of BS that we're going to have to face. So vote. This election is more important than any past election in the history of this nation. I'd love to know what you think. 714-576-4054. Daily at Dollemore.com. Thank you for joining me. It is up to us. We have the power individually, and collectively, we need to voice our opinion. Vote. Write your elected leaders, especially if you're in Wisconsin. There's a slate of Republicans that need to have their asses voted out, sent back to the private sector where they can do the patriotic thing and get the economy going again in the midst of this pandemic. Thank you very much. See you next time. Be genuine and take care of one another during these times.